Imagine the scene. The year is 1551, within the hallowed, solemn confines of Honno-ji Temple. The very air is thick, almost oppressive, with the hypnotic drone of chanting monks, their voices a mournful chorus for a recently departed, formidable warlord. Abruptly, the heavy temple doors burst inward, the jarring crash violently splintering the sacred, ritualistic silence. Down the central aisle strides a figure, not the expected grieving son, but rather a force of nature, almost a wild animal. His kimono, carelessly torn open to the waist, reveals a raw defiance, and his disheveled hair is crudely bound with mere straw. This is Oda Nobunaga. He pays no mind to the terrified gasps that ripple through the assembled clan elders, their shock palpable. He marches purposefully, directly to the altar where his father's spirit tablet is enshrined. He offers no respectful bow. He utters no prayer. Instead, he plunges his hand deep into the ornate bronze incense urn, seizes a scorching fistful of burning ash, and with a savage, dismissive gesture, hurls it directly at the sacred ancestral shrine. The acrid, gray cloud of ash erupts, enveloping his father's memorial in a plume of desecration. Turning his back on the stunned, frozen crowd, he storms out with an air of absolute contempt. In mere seconds he has, through this audacious act, just brazenly declared war on the entire established social order of medieval Japan. Before we delve deeper into these forgotten tales of survival and suffering, if you find yourself enjoying the uncovering of history's hidden truths, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more compelling content just like this. And do me a favor, share in the comments below where you're tuning in from. I find it truly remarkable that we can explore these ancient stories together, connecting across vast expanses of time and space, united by our shared fascination with the past. To truly grasp why a son would so utterly desecrate his own father's funeral, one must first comprehend the brutal, uncompromising slaughterhouse into which he was born. This was the Sengoku period, aptly known as the Age of Warring States. Japan, as a unified nation, simply did not exist. It was a suffocating cage teeming with ravenous, starving wolves. The central government had completely collapsed, and betrayal had become the singular, governing law. Brothers would readily poison brothers for the mere acquisition of a castle. A vassal would not hesitate to stab his lord in the back for a paltry bag of rice. In the province of Owari, the Oda clan found itself perpetually encircled by enemies, all patiently waiting for any single sign of weakness to exploit. And Nobunaga, it seemed, gave them plenty. The local populace didn't hail him as a leader. They mockingly referred to him as Owari no Atsuku, the great fool of Owari. While other young lords meticulously applied themselves to the refined arts of poetry and the intricate rituals of tea ceremonies, Nobunaga, instead, would run semi-naked through the fields, engaging in rough-and-tumble wrestling with peasants and training relentlessly with long bamboo spears. He was notoriously unpredictable, fiercely violent, and utterly devoid of any interest in established traditions. The infamous funeral incident proved to be the final, unbearable straw. To the conservative clan elders, the act of flinging that sacred incense was not merely an egregious breach of etiquette, it was irrefutable proof of outright madness. They gazed upon their wild-eyed, unruly heir and foresaw nothing less than the complete ruin and destruction of their revered family lineage. Their collective gaze, therefore, pivoted toward his younger brother, Nobuyuki. Nobuyuki, by stark contrast, was polite, diligently obedient, and reassuringly safe. As the priest stoically swept up the scattered, defiled ash, the fateful decision was quietly made in the oppressive shadows. The great fool, Nobunaga, simply had to be eliminated. The funeral may have concluded, but the deadly hunt for Nobunaga's head had just begun. The immediate fallout from the funeral was swift and brutal, yet the first blood spilled did not come from an assassin's stealthy blade. It came, shockingly, from the hand of the only man who had ever genuinely loved Nobunaga. Hirate Mitsuhide was an old retainer, a devoted tutor who had dedicated years of his life attempting to temper the young lord's untamed, wild spirit. He had, ultimately, failed. Witnessing Nobunaga's blasphemous act of throwing ash at the sacred altar utterly broke him. Days after the incident, Hirate sat in quiet solitude within his quarters, penned a final, poignant letter admonishing his master to fundamentally change his reckless ways, and then performed seppuku. He sliced open his own belly, offering his very life as a desperate, final lesson in responsibility and honor. When news of Hirate's death reached Nobunaga, something profound within him fractured. He did not erupt in a fit of rage. He did not scream. He simply absorbed the raw, brutal violence of the act. The sudden, sacrificial death of his mentor stripped away the last fragile layer of his childhood innocence. He later built a temple to honor Hirate, but he did not, however, become the polite, conforming samurai the old man had so earnestly wished for. Instead, his focus sharpened with a chilling intensity. He realized, with stark clarity, that in the cutthroat world of Owari, affection was a crippling weakness and any hesitation was nothing short of a death sentence. He would need that newfound clarity immediately. The clan elders had already made their decisive move. They swiftly rallied their support behind his younger brother, Nobuyuki. Nobuyuki was, in every conceivable way, the antithesis of Nobunaga, soft-spoken, respectfully traditional, and crucially, easily manipulated. The brothers eventually confronted each other on the battlefield of Ino. It was, in essence, a civil war in miniature. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Nobunaga decisively crushed his brother's forces. He displayed a tactical brilliance that utterly shocked even seasoned veterans, masterfully utilizing unprecedented speed and relentless aggression to shatter Nobuyuki's battle lines. Capturing his brother, Nobunaga held his blade menacingly to Nobuyuki's throat. This was the pivotal moment to definitively secure his rule. But then their mother, the formidable Lady Tsuchida, dramatically threw herself between them. She implored her eldest son to spare the life of her younger, favored child, pleading with the demon to show mercy to his own flesh and blood. Nobunaga gazed at his mother, a woman who had consistently favored the obedient Nobuyuki over the wild, unpredictable Otsuka. In a rare, fleeting moment of hesitation, he lowered his sword. He pardoned his brother. It was a mistake he would not make twice. Mercy, in the unforgiving Sengoku period, was all too often misinterpreted as sheer stupidity. Nobuyuki, alive but utterly humiliated, did not learn gratitude. He learned secrecy. He retreated to his castle and immediately began meticulously plotting a second coup. He quietly gathered new allies, whispered enticing new promises, and meticulously prepared to strike again. Nobunaga, however, observed it all. He had established extensive networks of spies, commoners, and merchants who reported every single whisper and rumor across the province. When the reports of this second, audacious betrayal reached him, the last vestige of the boy who had once listened to his mother utterly evaporated. He devised a plan that was cold, meticulously theatrical, and ruthlessly efficient. Nobunaga feigned a mortal illness. He lay in his chambers at Kyoto Castle, seemingly surrounded by potent medicines and grim-faced physicians. He sent urgent word to his brother. "I am dying. Come to me. Let us make peace before I pass." Nobuyuki, foolishly believing that destiny was finally handing him control of the clan without a fight, eagerly took the bait. He arrived at Kyoto Castle, meticulously dressed in formal attire, fully expecting to receive a dying man's final, weighty words. He entered the inner chambers, deliberately leaving his bodyguards at the gate. He slid open the delicate paper doors only to see Nobunaga lying quietly under a quilt. As Nobuyuki respectfully bowed, cautiously approaching the bedside, the dying man suddenly threw off the covers. There was no sickness, only a steel trap snapping shut with terrifying finality. Nobunaga's loyal guards emerged silently from the surrounding shadows. There was no desperate battle this time, no mother to intervene. The assassination was swift and absolute. Nobunaga eliminated his own brother, not on a glorious battlefield, but in the intimate confines of a bedroom. This chilling execution sent a profound shockwave throughout the Oda clan. The message was absolute and unambiguous. Familial bonds meant absolutely nothing when weighed against the stability and security of the domain. By ruthlessly killing Nobuyuki, Nobunaga permanently silenced the internal factions and dissent. He was now the undisputed master of Owari. But as he stoically wiped the blood from his hands, he cast his gaze eastward. A giant was coming. Imagawa Yoshimoto, the most powerful warlord in the entire region, had amassed an army of 25,000 men. He was marching relentlessly toward Owari, and he fully intended to erase the Oda clan from the annals of history. The year is 1560. The mathematics of war were absolute, and they were unequivocally not in Nobunaga's favor. Imagawa Yoshimoto, the aristocratic warlord who proudly styled himself as the number one Bao in the Takedo, had already crossed the border. He commanded a formidable army of 25,000 men. Nobunaga, by contrast, could barely scrape together 2,500. The odds against him were a staggering 10-1. Inside Kyoto Castle, the war council was a scene of utter hysteria. Old, conservative retainers vehemently argued for a desperate siege, suggesting they simply lock the gates and pray fervently for a divine miracle. Others, succumbing to despair, proposed immediate surrender, clinging to the faint hope that Yoshimoto might be merciful enough to allow the Oda name to survive as mere vassals. Nobunaga sat silently in the center of the chaotic room, seemingly detached, idly picking at his nails, listening to the rising panic that felt like bitter bile in his throat. He yawned. Then, rising to his feet, he simply told them all to go home, and walked out. The generals were utterly baffled. They firmly believed their lord had finally lost his mind completely. But Nobunaga wasn't ignoring the existential threat. He was meticulously preparing his soul. He retired to his private quarters and summoned his favorite hand drum. Taking up his fan, he began to perform a verse from the classic no play, Atsumori. His deep, resonant voice echoed through the empty wooden halls, carrying the haunting words. Man's life is 50 years in the lower world within the Giton. It is but a fleeting dream, an illusion. Is there anything that lasts forever? He danced with a solemn, rhythmic intensity, a man accepting his own mortality even before the battle had even commenced. If life itself was merely an illusion, then fear, he reasoned, was nothing but a wasteful emotion. He dramatically threw down the fan, swiftly strapped on his armor, gulped down a bowl of rice porridge while standing, and rode out of the castle gates with only 5 attendants by his side. He did not wait for his main army. He fully expected them to either catch up or be left behind in his furious wake. As he rode south, the oppressive summer sky above them turned a bruised, ominous purple. The heat was stifling and relentless. Reports began to trickle in, confirming that Yoshimoto's massive army was resting, dangerously complacent, in a narrow gorge known as Okahazama. They were celebrating their anticipated easy invasion, freely drinking sake and loosening their heavy armor in the sweltering heat. They felt utterly untouchable. Then, the heavens opened. A thunderstorm of biblical proportions violently slammed into the valley. Rain fell in sheets so thick and blinding you couldn't even discern the man standing directly next to you. Thunder shook the very ground, conveniently masking the telltale sound of thousands of hooves and boots. For any other commander, such a storm would have been a catastrophic hindrance. For Nobunaga, it was perfect, divine cover. He expertly led his small, audacious force through the blinding, torrential rain, meticulously circling behind the unsuspecting Imagawa encampment. His soldiers were drenched, caked in mud, and absolutely terrified, but they continued to follow the demon, on horseback without question. As they crested the ridge overlooking the gorge, the rain suddenly, miraculously ceased. The sun did not emerge, but the deafening noise did. Below them, the vast Imagawa camp was in utter disarray. Tents had collapsed from the wind, and soldiers stumbled aimlessly through the thick mud, disoriented and likely still hungover. Nobunaga did not deliver a rousing speech. He simply pointed his spear. The Oda forces roared down the hill like a devastating landslide. They did not engage the front lines. They smashed directly into the chaotic center, aiming with laser precision for the command tent. The Imagawa soldiers, dazed and confused, initially believed a brawl had simply erupted among their own men. By the time they realized it was an enemy attack, it was far, far too late. Oda's samurai carved a path of crimson ruin through the camp. Imagawa Yoshimoto, the man who arrogantly believed he would soon be shogun, stepped out of his tent, loudly shouting at his men to keep the noise down. He saw 2 Oda warriors charging him. One ruthlessly drove a spear into his thigh. The other, with a swift, decisive stroke, took his head. The battle was over in mere minutes. The giant had fallen. The 25,000 leaderless troops scattered like dust in the wind. Nobunaga stood in the mud, holding the severed head of the most powerful warlord in all of Japan. He had gambled everything on a trifecta of speed, fortuitous weather, and sheer shock, and he had won spectacularly. The Fool of Owari died that transformative afternoon in the gorge. Rising from the mud was a formidable conqueror who had fully realized that the impossible was merely another, more audacious strategy. Victory at Okahazama did not make Nobunaga complacent. On the contrary, it made him ravenously hungry for more. He spent the next 7 years systematically dismantling the neighboring Saito clan in Mino province. When their formidable mountain fortress of Inabayama finally fell, Nobunaga did something truly strange and unexpected. He didn't just move in, he boldly rebranded it. He renamed the castle Gifu, a direct reference to the legendary Mount Hiei in ancient China, which served as the pivotal launching point for the Zhou dynasty's unification of the land. The message, though subtle, was deafeningly clear to the educated elite. Nobunaga was no longer content with being merely a provincial warlord. He wanted the entire map. To make his grand intention unequivocally clear to the illiterate masses, he commissioned a striking new seal. In an era when warlords typically adorn their documents with elaborate family crests or flowery religious mottos, Nobunaga chose a stark, 4-character phrase, Tenkafubu. It translates roughly to, "All the world under one military rule." He stamped this ominous red ink on every document, every order, and every letter he issued. It was a visual, relentless pulse, constantly reminding friend and foe alike that true peace would only be achieved through the unwavering power of his sword. But an army, as the saying goes, marches on its stomach, and grand conquest requires an abundance of gold. Here the fool startlingly revealed himself to be an economic genius. For centuries, Japan's economy had been tragically strangled by powerful guild monopolies and countless local toll gates. A merchant attempting to travel a mere 10 miles might find himself forced to pay taxes at 5 different barriers, each owned by avaricious temples or petty, greedy lords. Commerce was agonizingly slow, prohibitively expensive, and riddled with corruption. Nobunaga looked at this archaic, inefficient system and took a metaphorical sledgehammer to it. He boldly declared a revolutionary policy known as Rikichi Rikuza. Free markets and open guilds. He dispatched his soldiers to physically tear down the toll barriers on the borders of his domain. He abolished the exclusive, restrictive rights of the powerful guilds. Suddenly, a humble farmer no longer needed explicit permission from a corrupt monk to sell his rice. A blacksmith no longer needed to pay an arbitrary fee to a local lord to forge a sword. Merchants flooded into Gifu, and the town exploded with unprecedented activity and prosperity. Money flowed freely, and the substantial taxes levied on that newfound wealth funded the critical purchase of more armor, more horses, and eventually, revolutionary guns. While other daimyo were obsessing over archaic concepts of honor and ancient ancestry, Nobunaga was meticulously building a relentless war machine powered by the sheer force of free trade. He understood, with chilling clarity, that to unify Japan, he first had to break the chains that had held it back for so long. From the high, commanding balcony of Gifu Castle, Nobunaga gazed intently west, toward the venerable city of Kyoto. The capital was a chaotic mess. The shogun was a mere puppet, and the emperor himself was living in utter poverty. To legitimize his burgeoning rule, Nobunaga desperately needed a compelling cause. That cause dramatically arrived in the form of Ashikaga Yoshiaki, a displaced heir to the shogunate, who was desperately seeking a strong arm to reinstate him on the throne. Yoshiaki foolishly believed he was merely hiring a bodyguard. He had absolutely no idea he was inviting a ferocious tiger into his own house. Nobunaga, of course, readily accepted the invitation. The momentous march to the capital began, not as an invasion, but cleverly presented as a liberation. The unification of Japan had officially commenced. By 1571, the ambitious unification had stalled significantly. The shogun, Yoshiaki, realizing he was nothing more than a glorified stamp collector for Nobunaga, had secretly organized a formidable alliance to crush him. The Asakura and Azai clans, notably led by Nobunaga's own brother-in-law, launched a coordinated attack from the north. When Nobunaga counterattacked with his characteristic ferocity, these allied armies fled to the one place they mistakenly believed was utterly untouchable, Mount Hiei. Mount Hiei wasn't just any mountain. It was the revered spiritual heart of Japan. It was home to Enryakuji, a sprawling complex comprising thousands of temples that had stood for nearly 8 centuries. It was widely regarded as the sacred guardian of the imperial capital. The monks who resided there, the Sohei, were anything but peaceful meditators. They were warrior monks, formidable and heavily armed with naginata, who had terrorized Kyoto's emperors for generations. They were corrupt, immensely wealthy, and incredibly politically powerful. They firmly believed their holy status rendered them immune to the laws of mere men. When the enemy armies brazenly took shelter within these sacred grounds, Nobunaga sent a chilling message to the abbots. His offer was simple and stark. Remain neutral. Evict the enemy soldiers, and I will spare your temples. Side with my enemies, and I will burn the mountain to the ground. The monks, arrogant in their assumed divine protection, ignored him completely. They truly believed no mortal, not even the fool of Owari, would ever dare strike down the holy servants of the Buddha. They assumed the gods themselves would strike him dead if he even tried. They were profoundly wrong. On a damp morning in late September, Nobunaga's formidable army of 30,000 men meticulously encircled the base of the sacred mountain. There was no charging scream, no honorable duel to commence the hostilities. The chilling order was simply given. Light the torches. Soldiers set fire to the dense forests at the foot of the mountain. The flames, voraciously fed by the wind, raced upward with terrifying speed, creating a devastating ring of fire that slowly but relentlessly tightened its grip around the holy peak. As the inferno climbed, the trap snapped shut with brutal finality. Monks, women, children, and even learned priests desperately attempted to flee down the slopes, only to be met by an impenetrable wall of Oda spears. Nobunaga had issued strict, unambiguous orders. Spare no one. The massacre was absolute and total. Ancient wooden halls housing priceless scriptures and statues, many designated as national treasures, turned to ash in mere minutes. The horrifying screams of the dying mingled with the insatiable roar of the fire. It is grimly said that over 3,000 people were slaughtered that dreadful day, the wise, the young, the holy. It simply didn't matter. Nobunaga watched the mountain burn from his command post, his face eerily illuminated by the malevolent glow of the destruction. This was the precise moment the fool irrevocably died, and the demon was truly irrevocably born. In destroying Mount Hiei, Nobunaga shattered the psychological hold that religion had so powerfully exerted over the samurai class. He proved, unequivocally, that tradition, sanctity, and divine wrath were nothing more than comforting stories people told themselves to protect their interests. In the smoldering ashes of Enryakuji, he found a new, terrifying title. In a letter dispatched to the formidable warlord Takeda Shinjin shortly thereafter, he signed his name not as a mere lord, but as Darokuten Mao, the demon king of the sixth heaven. He had fully embraced the villainous role the world expected him to be, and he wore the title like an impenetrable suit of armor. By 1575, Nobunaga had grown increasingly bored with the predictable treachery and convoluted machinations of Japanese politics. He turned his eyes instead toward the exotic, the strange, and the unknown. When the Jesuit missionaries arrived in Kyoto, they brought with them a man who caused an immediate sensation and stopped traffic in the bustling capital. He was an African servant, standing over 6 feet tall, a veritable giant compared to the average Japanese man of that era. He was described as possessing the strength of 10 men and skin like polished charcoal. Rumors of this black giant inevitably reached Nobunaga. Intrigued, he summoned the Jesuits to his lavish palace. When he first laid eyes on the man, Nobunaga refused to believe his eyes. He suspected a trick, a clever deception. He ordered the man to strip to the waist and had his servant rigorously scrub the man's skin, convinced it was merely painted with black ink. When the water ran clear and the skin remained undeniably dark, Nobunaga was utterly delighted. He didn't perceive a savage or a mere curiosity. He saw a perfect warrior. Unlike the Japanese daimyo who were inextricably bound by complex webs of family alliances and constant potential betrayals, this man had no connections, no clan, and absolutely no reason to stab Nobunaga in the back. He was a perfect blank slate. Nobunaga immediately took him into his service, bestowed upon him a house, a generous stipend, and a Japanese name, Yasuke. Yasuke thus became the first foreign-born samurai in history. He rode proudly beside the Demon King, carrying his weapons, a towering figure of black iron amidst a sea of lacquered armor. This was a deliberate provocation by Nobunaga. By elevating a foreigner above his hereditary vassals, Nobunaga was sending an unmistakable message to his generals. I decide who has value. Your pedigree means nothing. This intense obsession with controlling value extended far beyond people. It consumed the very economy of culture itself. Nobunaga ingeniously weaponized the traditional tea ceremony. In the Sengoku period, a seemingly simple ceramic tea bowl could be worth more than an entire castle. Nobunaga launched the Maibutsugari, the hunt for famous tea objects. He demanded that conquered lords surrender their most prized tea caddies and bowls as tribute. He hosted lavish tea gatherings, granting his generals special permission to practice the ceremony as a coveted reward for significant military victories. It was a brilliant psychological leash. A general might fight for years, enduring incredible hardship, just to be allowed the singular honor of serving tea in the Nobunaga style. He effectively transformed aesthetic appreciation into a rigid chain of command. But as his collection grew, so too did his isolation. He began construction on Azuchi Castle, a fortress unlike anything Japan had ever witnessed. It was built atop a mountain overlooking the serene Lake Biwa. The top floors were resplendent, painted in vibrant red and gleaming gold, glowing like a second sun against the sky. Inside, he commissioned magnificent paintings of dragons and tigers, yet conspicuously placed no statues of gods or Buddhas. In the very center of the keep, he placed a single, unadorned stone and declared it the sole object of worship. The message was blasphemous and chillingly clear. The gods have left the building. I am the only power you need to pray to. Nobunaga spent his days in this golden tower, surrounded by exotic foreign objects, drinking fine wine from delicate glass goblets, attended by his African samurai. He was, without doubt, the most powerful man in Japan. But he had become dangerously disconnected from the harsh reality of the men serving him. Below the golden floors of Azuchi, resentment was boiling, quietly simmering. His generals were not mere tools or decorative tea bowls. They were proud men with definite breaking points. And one man, a bold general with a sharp mind and a notoriously fragile ego, was about to crack. By the spring of 1582, the atmosphere inside the Oda clan had curdled into bitter animosity. Nobunaga was no longer merely a demanding lord. He had transformed into a tyrant who seemed to openly delight in the suffering and humiliation of his subordinates. No one felt this cruel sting more acutely than Akechi Mitsuhide. Mitsuhide was, in many ways, everything Nobunaga was not: a scholar, a poet, a staunch traditionalist who deeply valued etiquette and stability. He was, ironically, Nobunaga's most effective general, the man who had largely secured the vital region of Kyoto. Yet Nobunaga treated him with the utter contempt one might reserve for a stray dog. He bestowed upon Mitsuhide a demeaning nickname that stripped away all his dignity. King Kanakama, or Bald Rat, mercilessly mocking Mitsuhide's receding hairline. The breaking point finally arrived in May. Nobunaga's greatest ally, Tokugawa Ieyasu, was journeying to Azuchi Castle for a grand, diplomatic reception. This was a diplomatic event of the highest order. Nobunaga appointed Mitsuhide as the official host, tasking him with meticulously preparing a banquet that would utterly dazzle their esteemed guests. Mitsuhide threw himself into the monumental task. He sourced the finest ingredients from across the various provinces, spending an absolute fortune to ensure the sashimi was impeccably fresh and the presentation flawlessly exquisite. He truly believed this was his chance to finally earn his master's elusive respect. On the day of the inspection, Nobunaga walked into the banquet hall. He paced slowly around the trays of food, his face utterly unreadable. He paused abruptly in front of a platter of fish. He leaned down, sniffed it with exaggerated distaste, and his eyes widened with mock disgust. "This fish is rotten!" he barked, his voice filled with feigned outrage. Mitsuhide protested vehemently, terrified. He explained, in a desperate rush, that the fish had been caught that very morning, that it was of the finest possible quality. Nobunaga didn't listen. He violently grabbed the tray and hurled it across the room, scattering expensive porcelain and fresh seafood across the pristine tatami mats. "You dare serve poison to my guest?" Nobunaga roared, his voice laced with venom. "You incompetent filth!" Then the physical violence started. In front of the cowering servants and other mortified retainers, Nobunaga grabbed the 50-year-old general, put him in a brutal headlock, and began savagely beating him over the head with his heavy iron war fan. He struck him again and again, drawing blood, utterly humiliating him completely. He didn't stop at physical abuse. He fired Mitsuhide from his duty as host on the spot. Then came the final, devastating blow. Nobunaga issued a new, chilling order. Mitsuhide was to leave immediately for the Western Front to fight the Mori clan. But there was a cruel catch. Nobunaga stripped Mitsuhide of his current lands, his home, his income, and his security, promising him vague, new lands in the West if he succeeded. The implication was horrifyingly clear. "I am taking what you have. If you want a home, go conquer it from the enemy. If you fail, you starve." Mitsuhide left the room, blood trickling down his forehead. His honor was utterly shattered. He realized then that loyalty to the Demon King was nothing less than a suicide pact. No matter how hard he worked, no matter how many battles he won, he was always just one rotten fish away from complete ruin. As he marched his troops out of the capital, ostensibly to fight the Mori, a very different, darker plan began to meticulously form in the shadows of his mind. June 21, 1582. It was a humid, oppressive night in Kyoto. Nobunaga was staying at Honno-ji Temple, a fortified compound nestled in the very heart of the city. He was on his way to the front lines to join the ongoing campaign against the Mori. But for this night, he was resting, feeling secure. His main army was miles away. He had only a skeletal guard of about 30 pages and servants, including his young lover, Mori Ranmaru, and the formidable African samurai Yasuke. He felt utterly safe. After all, he was the undisputed master of the board. Who would dare strike down the king? Miles away in the concealing darkness, 13,000 soldiers marched under the distinctive banner of the Akechi clan. They believed they were heading west to support the war effort. But as they crossed the Katsura River, Akechi Mitsuhide abruptly halted his horse. He gazed intensely at the capital, silently sleeping in the distance. He raised his whip and gave the order that would forever change Japanese history. He shouted the famous phrase, "Teki wa Honno-ji en Iari," meaning, "The enemy is at Honno-ji." The entire army turned, their destination now irrevocably altered. At dawn, the thunderous sound of hooves shattered the fragile silence of Kyoto. Nobunaga awoke to the frantic shouts and the unmistakable clash of steel. At first, he was merely annoyed, thinking his pages were drunkenly brawling. Then, an arrow savagely punched through the delicate paper shoji screen. He sprang up, grabbing his bow. He looked out into the courtyard and saw the distinctive light blue banners fluttering ominously in the torchlight, the bellflower crest. It was Mitsuhide. Nobunaga did not scream. He did not panic. He calmly asked a servant, "Who leads the rebellion?" When the servant confirmed it was Akechi, Nobunaga simply nodded and uttered a phrase that historians have analyzed for centuries. Simen Nashi. It translates profoundly to, "It cannot be helped," or "There is no other way." It was an acceptance of inevitable karma. The man whom he had so cruelly humiliated had finally come to collect his agonizing debt. The battle was utterly hopeless. 30 men against 13,000. Yet the Demon King did not surrender. He fired arrows until his bowstring snapped completely. He grabbed a spear and fought valiantly in the hallway, cutting down Akechi soldiers who hesitated to attack the legend in the flesh. Yasuke and Mori Ranmaru fought like enraged lions at the entrance, desperately buying their master precious, fleeting seconds, but the overwhelming numbers were simply too much. Soldiers began tossing lit torches into the temple. The dry wooden halls, parched from the summer heat, caught fire instantly and roared to life. The acrid smoke began to choke the dwindling defenders. Realizing the inevitable end had come, Nobunaga retreated into the inner sanctum. He barred the heavy doors. He was grimly determined that his head, the supreme trophy of the era, would never be taken by a traitor. He ordered the room set on fire from within. Inside the burning room, as the flames roared around him, mirroring the inferno of Mount Hiei years ago, Oda Nobunaga knelt. He unbuttoned his blood-stained robe. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't pray to the gods he had so openly mocked. He drew his short sword, plunged it into his stomach, and sliced across. The ceiling collapsed. The temple burned to the ground, a fiery tomb. When the smoke cleared the next morning, Akechi Mitsuhide frantically searched the ashes. He found charred bodies, melted armor, and broken swords. But he never found Nobunaga's body. The Demon King had vanished into the smoke, leaving behind a profound mystery that would forever haunt his killer. Akechi Mitsuhide foolishly believed that by killing the demon, he would be hailed as a national hero. He thought the old guard, the powerful temples, and the traditional samurai would immediately rally behind him to restore the old order. He profoundly miscalculated. Japan had already changed far too much. The terror Nobunaga had so effectively inspired was far stronger than the fleeting loyalty Mitsuhide had hoped for. Mitsuhide's reign lasted a mere 13 days. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Nobunaga's most loyal general, the man who had risen from a lowly sandal-bearer to a formidable commander, was fighting miles away in the west. When news of the betrayal reached him, Hideyoshi performed a military miracle. He swiftly made a truce with his enemy, and marched his army back to Kyoto at a speed that defied all logic and expectation. The famous Great Chugoku Return was legendary. He caught Mitsuhide utterly unprepared at the Battle of Yamazaki. The traitor's army was decisively crushed. Mitsuhide fled into the surrounding hills, where he was not killed by a great samurai in an honorable duel. He was hunted down and savagely beaten to death by peasants wielding crude bamboo spears. The traditionalist general was ironically killed by the very class of people Nobunaga had so deliberately empowered. With the traitor dead, the crucial question remained: who would eat the rice cake that Nobunaga had so painstakingly pounded? History offers us a famous saying about the three great unifiers of Japan. Nobunaga pounds the rice cake. Hideyoshi kneads it. And Ieyasu sits down and eats it. Toyotomi Hideyoshi bravely took up Nobunaga's mantle, ultimately completing the arduous unification of Japan in 1590. But he tragically lacked the prestigious bloodline to officially become shogun. After he died, the cautious and ever-patient ally, Tokugawa Ieyasu, a man who had endured Nobunaga's bullying for decades, shrewdly seized power. Ieyasu established the Tokugawa shogunate, a dynasty that kept Japan at peace and largely closed off from the outside world for over 250 years. It is easy, in retrospect, to gaze upon the peaceful Edo period under Ieyasu and label it a golden age. But that enduring peace was meticulously built on a foundation of ash, painstakingly laid by Nobunaga. Without Nobunaga's unyielding brutality, the formidable power of the warrior monks would never have been broken. Without his deliberate destruction of the old, restrictive guilds, the economy would have remained stagnant and inefficient. Without his revolutionary adoption of the gun, the samurai class would have remained a fragmented collection of squabbling warlords. Oda Nobunaga was the great, necessary filter of Japanese history. He was the consuming fire that ruthlessly cleared the dead wood from the forest so that vibrant new trees could finally grow. He had to be a monster so that those who came after him could, finally, be rulers. He was a man who lived too fast, destroyed too much, and dreamed too big for his own tumultuous time. In the end, he didn't need a physical grave. Modern Japan is his enduring monument. From the fundamental separation of church and state to the profound unification of the islands, his indelible fingerprints are on the very DNA of the nation. The demon king died in the devastating flames of Honno-ji, but the world he so brutally forged rose from those ashes, stronger and more unified than ever before. If you're eager to understand how the second unifier, the monkey, Hideyoshi, managed to invade Korea and nearly bankrupt the very country Nobunaga had so painstakingly built, simply click on this video here. And please, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to help keep these vital stories alive. I'll see you in the next one.